I am Amber Mitchell, 28 years old, and last month I watched my stepmother Patricia bar me from my own father's funeral. Dad was my best friend after Mom died. Patricia made sure I couldn't say goodbye. When she blocked me from the will reading with that smug smirk saying, "This meeting is only for heirs named in the will." She had no idea what I was carrying in my bag. The lawyer opened my file and Patricia turned ghostly pale. If you have ever dealt with toxic family members trying to steal what rightfully belongs to you, please like and subscribe. I would love to know where you are watching from in the comments below as I share how I fought for my father's true wishes. My father, Robert Mitchell, was my anchor in this world. After my mother died from breast cancer when I was 15, it was just Dad and me against the world. He was a successful real estate developer in Boston, having built his company from scratch after graduating from college. Dad worked hard, but he always made time for me. Every Sunday morning, we had our special tradition. We would sail his small boat in Boston Harbor when the weather permitted, then have brunch at Harborview Cafe where we would talk for hours. He would listen to my teenage problems with the patience of a saint, offering wisdom that only seemed to grow more valuable as I got older. "Amber," he would say, "always trust your gut. Your mother had the best instincts of anyone I ever knew, and you inherited that from her." When I was 19 and a sophomore in college, Dad met Patricia Winters at a charity fundraiser. She was attractive, charming, and seemed genuinely interested in him. I was happy for Dad. After 4 years of grieving Mom, he deserved some happiness. Patricia came with baggage, though. She had 2 children, Mason, who was 17 at the time, and Lindsay, who was 15. From our first meeting, something felt off. They smiled too broadly, laughed too loudly at Dad's jokes, and their eyes lingered a little too long on the expensive furnishings in our home. Still, I tried. I really did. I invited Lindsay for coffee, attempted to connect with Mason about his college plans. Dad was falling hard for Patricia, and I wanted to support his happiness. "They just need time to warm up," Dad assured me when I mentioned the coldness I felt from them. "They lost their father too, you know." Well, not lost exactly. He abandoned them, which might be worse. The wedding happened quickly, just 6 months after they met. I stood beside Dad as his best woman, forcing a smile as Patricia recited vows about honesty and devotion that somehow rang hollow to my ears. Changes happened immediately after they moved into our family home. Photos of my mother that had always held places of honor began disappearing, replaced by portraits of Patricia and her children. Family heirlooms were rearranged or stored away to make room for Patricia's modern tastes. The Sunday brunches dwindled. First, Patricia would create convenient conflicts. "Oh, Robert, did you forget we have the Hendersons coming over today? Or Mason has a game, and we should all support him as a family." When we did manage our father-daughter time, Patricia would call repeatedly with manufactured emergencies. Once, she called 8 times because she could not find the spare key to the vacation house, only for Dad to return home and find it exactly where it always was. Meanwhile, Mason and Lindsay treated my father's home and money as their birthright. Mason wrecked 2 cars in his first year of having a license, and Dad replaced them without complaint. Lindsay maxed out credit cards shopping, and Dad quietly paid the bills. I chose a different path. Though Dad offered to pay for my education and living expenses, I insisted on working through college. I took out modest student loans and worked part-time jobs. Not because I didn't appreciate Dad's generosity, but because I valued independence. "You are so stubborn, just like your mother," Dad would say with a proud smile. She never wanted handouts either. After graduating with my marketing degree, I took a job with a tech company in Seattle. The distance hurt, but we maintained our close relationship with daily phone calls and monthly visits. During those visits, I noticed subtle changes in Dad. He seemed tired, less vibrant. When I expressed concern, Patricia would interject. "He is fine, Amber. Stop being so dramatic." Men his age slow down a bit. Over the past year, Dad's health declined more rapidly. He developed heart problems, and his once robust frame became thinner. During my visits, I noticed his medication seemed to change frequently, and he often appeared disoriented. During my last visit 3 months ago, Dad asked Patricia to give us some privacy. When she reluctantly left the room, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Amber, I need to tell you something important," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the door. "I have been making changes, setting things right. If anything happens to me, talk to Eleanor at the office. She has something for you." Patricia returned before he could elaborate, carrying a glass of water and pills for Dad. "Time for your medicine, Robert," she said sweetly, but her eyes were cold when they flicked to me. That was the last real conversation I had with my father. I called daily as always, but increasingly, Patricia would answer and claim he was resting or unable to come to the phone. When I did speak with him, he sounded foggy, his words slurring. I planned to fly back to Boston the following month to check on him in person, but I never got the chance. The call came on a Tuesday night. I was working late, finalizing a marketing campaign when my phone lit up with Mason's number. This was unusual. My stepbrother rarely contacted me directly. "Your dad is in the hospital," he said without preamble. "Mom told me to call you." My heart dropped. "What happened? Is he okay?" "I do not know the details. Mom just said to tell you he is in Boston General." He hung up before I could ask anything else. I booked the first flight to Boston, a red-eye leaving in 3 hours. I packed haphazardly, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The 5-hour flight felt like days, my anxiety mounting with each passing minute. When I finally reached Boston General at 7 a.m., I rushed to the information desk. "Robert Mitchell," I said breathlessly. "He was admitted yesterday. I am his daughter." The receptionist directed me to the cardiac care unit on the 4th floor. As the elevator doors opened, I spotted Patricia and her children in the waiting area. Patricia was dressed immaculately as always, not a hair out of place despite the supposed emergency. "Patricia, how is he? What happened?" I asked, approaching them. She stood, positioning herself between me and the hallway leading to the patient rooms. "Amber, you did not need to come all this way." "Of course I did. He is my father. I need to see him." Patricia's expression hardened. "The doctors are allowing only immediate family at this time. Robert needs rest, not emotional scenes." I felt like I had been slapped. "I am his immediate family. I am his daughter." "The doctors were very specific," she insisted, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Family only right now. We will call you if there are any changes." Lindsay smirked behind her mother, while Mason at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. I approached the nurse's station, explaining that I was Robert Mitchell's daughter and needed to see him. The charge nurse looked confused. "The patient's wife indicated his only children were already here," she said, glancing toward Patricia. "That is his wife, but I am his daughter from his first marriage," I explained, frustration building. "Please, I just need to see my dad." The nurse looked torn, caught in a family dispute she wanted no part of. "Let me speak with Mrs. Mitchell and the doctor," she finally said. I waited for hours. Patricia and her children were allowed in and out of Dad's room while I remained in the waiting area. Eventually, a doctor approached me. "Ms. Mitchell? I understand there is some confusion about visitation." I explained the situation, and he nodded sympathetically. "Your father is heavily sedated right now. His condition is serious but stable. We are monitoring his cardiac function. I will allow you a brief visit, but he likely will not be conscious." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As the doctor led me toward Dad's room, Patricia emerged and pulled him aside for a hushed conversation. When he returned, his demeanor had changed. "I apologize, but Mrs. Mitchell has informed me that your father explicitly stated he did not want visits from anyone outside his household during this hospitalization. As his medical proxy, we must respect her decisions regarding visitors. I could not believe what I was hearing. That is not true. My father would never say that. Please, just 5 minutes. The doctor apologized again, but remained firm. Hospital security was called when I refused to leave the floor. Humiliated and desperate, I was escorted to the lobby. Over the next 3 days, I tried everything. I came during different shifts, hoping to find more sympathetic staff. I waited in the parking garage to catch doctors leaving. I called the hospital administration. Nothing worked. Patricia had locked down access completely. On the 4th day, a nurse named Rachel approached me in the hospital cafeteria. "You are Robert Mitchell's daughter, right?" she asked quietly, sitting across from me. "Yes. Have you been caring for him? How is he doing?" She glanced around before speaking. "I should not be talking to you. But something does not feel right about the situation. Your father has been asking for you." My heart leapt. "He is conscious?" Patricia told everyone he was in a coma. Rachel shook her head. "He has periods of consciousness. He is weak but lucid at times." He specifically asked about his daughter Amber yesterday. Tears filled my eyes. "Can you help me see him?" "I will try. I am working tomorrow night. Come at 11 p.m. when visitation hours are over and the floor is quieter. I cannot promise anything, but I will try to get you in briefly." That night, I barely slept, clinging to hope that I would finally see Dad. But at 6 a.m., my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize. "Ms. Mitchell? This is Dr. Kaplan from Boston General. I am very sorry to inform you that your father passed away about an hour ago." The world stopped. "What? No, that cannot be right. He was stable," the nurse said. "He suffered a massive cardiac arrest in the early hours. We attempted resuscitation, but we were unsuccessful. I am truly sorry for your loss. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell him I loved him one last time." And Patricia had ensured it would be that way. The funeral arrangements were completely controlled by Patricia. The service was scheduled at an upscale funeral home rather than the small chapel where my mother's service had been held, where Dad had always said he wanted his own funeral. When I arrived at the service, an usher directed me to a seat in the back, far from the family section where Patricia, Mason, and Lindsay sat in the front row. I watched as person after person approached them with condolences, many glancing back at me with confusion. Some of Dad's oldest friends made a point of coming to sit with me or squeeze my shoulder in silent support. During the eulogy, Patricia painted herself as the devoted wife who had nursed my father through his illness. She spoke of their blended family while never once acknowledging me by name. When it came time to view the body, Patricia's brother physically stepped in front of me. "Family first," he said coldly. By the time I was allowed to approach, they were closing the casket. My last glimpse of my father was partial and rushed. At the reception afterward, I overheard Patricia speaking with a man I recognized as her lawyer, Gregory Harrison. "We will proceed with the reading on Tuesday," he said. "I have all the paperwork in order." "Good," Patricia replied. Robert was very specific about his wishes. "Everything is settled exactly as it should be." The smug satisfaction in her voice made my stomach turn. I left the reception early, driving through tears back to my hotel. I had never felt so alone, so defeated. Dad was gone, and Patricia had won. She had successfully cut me out of his final days and was clearly confident about what would happen next. That night, I sobbed until no more tears would come. I had lost not only my father but also my last connection to the family I had once known. Little did I know, Dad had anticipated Patricia's behavior and had set in motion a plan that would change everything. 3 days after the funeral, I was still staying at the Hampton Inn near my childhood home, unable to bring myself to return to Seattle. I had taken bereavement leave from work but had no real plan beyond that. The hollowness inside me made it difficult to think beyond each painful hour. A knock on my hotel room door startled me. I was not expecting anyone, and Patricia's allies had made it clear I was not welcome to linger in Boston. When I opened the door, I found Eleanor Davis, my father's executive assistant of 15 years, standing there looking nervous. "Eleanor? What are you doing here?" She glanced down the hallway before answering. "May I come in, Amber?" I should not be seen here. I stepped aside to let her enter, confusion temporarily displacing my grief. Eleanor had always been kind to me, but we were not particularly close. Once inside, she removed a package from her large purse. It was a manila envelope, sealed with red wax bearing the imprint of my father's signet ring, the one that had belonged to his grandfather. "Your father gave me this 6 months ago," Eleanor explained, handing me the package. "He made me promise to deliver it to you personally if anything happened to him. He was very specific that it should not be sent by mail or messenger, and that no one else should know about it." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. "Did he say what it was?" Eleanor shook her head. "Only that it was important and that you would understand what to do." She checked her watch. "I should go. Patricia has been at the office daily since your father died, going through his files. She fired 2 people yesterday." After Eleanor left, I stared at the package, afraid of what it might contain yet desperate to connect with Dad one last time. Finally, I broke the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside were 3 items: a handwritten letter on my father's personal stationery, a legal document in a sealed envelope marked with the logo of Harrington and Associates, not my father's usual law firm, and a small key taped to a card with an address and box number for First National Bank. With shaking hands, I unfolded my father's letter. "My dearest Amber, *, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I am so sorry for the pain you must be feeling, and even more sorry that I will not be there to comfort you. *, I have made a terrible mistake in trusting Patricia. Over the past year, I have noticed disturbing patterns in her behavior. Items disappearing, documents being moved, medications making me feel worse instead of better. My old friends suddenly unwelcome in our home. *. At first, I dismissed these concerns as paranoia. But then I found evidence that Patricia has been in contact with her ex-husband, the one she claimed abandoned her. The reality, as I discovered, is quite different. *. I updated my will 6 months ago with a new law firm. Patricia does not know about this. The enclosed document is a copy of this will. The original is registered with the state. *. The key is to a safety deposit box containing evidence you may need if Patricia contests the will, as I suspect she will. It also contains personal items I wanted to ensure reached you. *. I had planned to confront Patricia once I had gathered sufficient evidence, but my health has deteriorated more rapidly than expected. I fear my time is running short. *. Remember that I love you. Amber, you have been the greatest joy of my life. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you have become. *. All my love. Dad. Tears streamed down my face as I read his words, a mixture of grief and vindication washing over me. Dad had known. He had seen through Patricia's facade and had taken steps to protect me and his legacy. The sealed legal document was indeed a will, dated just 6 months earlier and notarized by witnesses I did not recognize. I did not open it, maintaining its official seal intact. The next morning, I went to First National Bank. After verifying my identity and the key, the bank manager escorted me to the vault and left me alone with the safety deposit box. The box contained several items. First was another letter from Dad, explaining each piece of evidence. Then there were photographs taken by a private investigator showing Patricia meeting with a man Dad identified as her supposedly estranged ex-husband. There were also photos of the same man visiting my father's house when Dad was away on business trips. More disturbing were the financial records showing unusual transfers from my father's personal accounts to offshore accounts linked to Patricia's brother. There were also copies of my father's medical records with notes in his handwriting questioning changes to his prescriptions that coincided with Patricia's trips to the pharmacy. A thumb drive contained audio recordings from my father's home office, capturing conversations between Patricia and her children discussing how they would spend their inheritance once the old man is gone. In one particularly chilling recording, Patricia instructed Mason to ensure Dad took all his medication while she was away for the weekend. "Make sure he takes the blue pills first," she had said. "They make him sleepy so he will not fuss about the others." The final document was a handwritten timeline my father had created, tracking his health decline against Patricia's actions. He noted increasing fatigue and confusion after Patricia insisted on preparing his meals and managing his medication. As I reviewed everything, a horrifying picture emerged. My father had not just been taken advantage of financially, he had been systematically isolated and possibly medically abused. The question that haunted me was whether Patricia had merely exploited his illness or actually accelerated his decline. With trembling hands, I repacked the evidence into my bag. Dad had provided me with everything I needed to challenge Patricia. Now I needed to find the right moment to use it. The day of the will reading arrived. I had not been officially notified, but Dad's old friend Walter Bennett, who had been my father's attorney for decades before being inexplicably fired by Patricia 3 months ago, tipped me off about the time and location. "Something stinks about this whole situation, Amber," Walter had told me over coffee the previous day. "Robert would never have cut you out of his final arrangements. And switching attorneys after 30 years of friendship? It does not add up." I arrived at the offices of Harrison and Powell precisely at 2 p.m. The receptionist looked startled when I gave my name. "Ms. Mitchell, you are not on the list for this meeting," she said after checking her computer. "I am Robert Mitchell's daughter. I should be at the reading of his will." I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. She made a phone call, speaking in hushed tones, then directed me to wait. A few minutes later, Gregory Harrison himself emerged from the conference room. "Ms. Mitchell, this is somewhat awkward, but the reading has already begun." "Mrs. Mitchell indicated you were aware you are not included in the proceedings." I stood my ground. "As Mr. Mitchell's daughter, I have a right to be present, regardless of the contents of the will." Harrison looked uncomfortable but nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Please follow me." When I entered the conference room, Patricia's face registered shock, then anger, then a composed smugness. Mason and Lindsay sat on either side of her, along with Patricia's brother and her personal assistant. "What is she doing here?" Patricia demanded, not even looking at me directly. "As Mr. Mitchell's daughter, Ms. Mitchell has requested to be present," Harrison explained. Patricia gave a theatrical sigh. "This meeting is only for heirs named in the will, which Amber is not." Robert was very clear about his wishes. The calm certainty in her voice made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure. I had not come this far to lose control now. "I understand you are grieving, Patricia, but I have a right to hear my father's wishes directly, even if he chose to disinherit me." My voice was steady, revealing none of the turmoil inside. Harrison looked relieved at my reasonable tone. "Perhaps we can proceed." As I was saying, the will dated January 15th of this year stipulates that the entirety of Robert Mitchell's estate, with the exception of specific personal items listed in Appendix A, is to be transferred to his wife, Patricia Mitchell, with secondary beneficiaries being her children, Mason and Lindsay Winters. Patricia shot me a triumphant look, which I met with a small, knowing smile that seemed to unsettle her slightly. Harrison continued reading the document, detailing the extensive assets my father had accumulated, The family home valued at $2.8 million, his company shares worth approximately $12 million, investment portfolios, vacation properties, and various personal collections of art and antiques. When he finished, Patricia placed a hand over her heart. Robert always took care of us. He knew what was best for the family. Are there any questions? Harrison asked, looking around the room. I reached into my bag and removed the sealed document Eleanor had delivered. Actually, I believe there has been a mistake. All eyes turned to me as I stood and walked to Harrison's position at the head of the table. I placed the document before him. What is this? He asked, frowning at the unfamiliar law firm seal. This is my father's most recent will, executed and filed with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts 6 months ago. Patricia shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. Robert would have told me if he updated his will. Harrison examined the document carefully, breaking the seal and reading through the first few pages. His expression changed from skepticism to concern. This appears to be a legally executed will dated more recently than the one we have been discussing. It bears Mr. Mitchell's signature, which I recognize, and proper witness attestations. He looked up at Patricia. Mrs. Mitchell, were you aware of this document? Patricia's face had drained of color. This is preposterous. It must be a forgery. Harrison continued examining the document. It contains language specifically revoking all prior wills and codicils. If this is authentic, it would supersede the will we were just reviewing. Read it, I said quietly. Harrison cleared his throat and began to read. The new will painted a very different picture of my father's wishes. Patricia and her children were provided for with modest trust funds that would pay them a reasonable living allowance, but give them no control over the principal. The family home was to be sold, with proceeds going to establish a charitable foundation in my mother's name. The bulk of the estate, including controlling interest in Mitchell Development Corporation, was left to me, with specific instructions about continuing my father's legacy of ethical development and charitable giving. Most damning was a clause near the end. In the event that my death occurs under circumstances that might be considered suspicious or premature, I direct my executor to authorize a full investigation, including toxicology reports and a review of all my medical treatment in the months preceding my death. Patricia's face contorted with rage. This is a lie. A complete fabrication. She turned to her children. Tell them, your father would never do this to us. Mason looked stunned, while Lindsay began to cry dramatically. Harrison held up a hand. Mrs. Mitchell, please. This document contains a notary seal and witnesses. It appears to have been filed with the state. If you contest it, we will need to proceed through proper legal channels. Contest it? I will destroy it. Robert loved me. He would never have done this behind my back. Patricia's carefully maintained composure had completely evaporated. That ungrateful bitch turned him against me. After everything I did for him. Her brother tried to calm her, but she shrugged him off violently. Mrs. Mitchell, Harrison said firmly, I must advise you that outbursts of this nature will not help your position if you choose to contest this will. The language here is quite clear. And there are additional sealed instructions regarding potential investigations into Mr. Mitchell's death. At the mention of investigations, Patricia went still. Her eyes darted to the door as if calculating an escape route. I remained calm, watching the scene unfold exactly as Dad had predicted. Patricia, I think we both know Dad saw through you at the end. This is his final message to you. You know nothing, she hissed. Your father was a confused old man. He did not know what he was signing. Harrison, now visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, interjected. I believe we should adjourn this meeting until we can verify the authenticity of this new document. Though I must note that it appears to be in order and the firm listed is reputable. Verify it? There is nothing to verify. I am his wife. Patricia gathered her belongings frantically. This meeting is over. My attorney will be in touch. She stormed toward the door, pausing only to spit final words at me. "This is not over, Amber." Her children followed her out, Mason looking back at me with an unreadable expression. The room fell silent after their departure. Harrison sighed heavily. "Ms. Mitchell, I apologize for the confusion. I had no knowledge of this updated will." "I understand," I said. "My father anticipated Patricia's actions. That is why he took precautions." As I gathered my own belongings, I felt a strange sense of calm. Dad had reached out from beyond the grave to protect me and expose Patricia's true nature. The battle was far from over, but the first decisive victory was mine. The immediate aftermath of the will reading was chaos. Patricia refused to vacate the family home as required by the newly discovered will, changing the security codes and instructing the staff not to admit me under any circumstances. My phone filled with vitriolic text messages from Patricia, alternating between threats and attempts to gaslight me about my father's mental state when he signed the new will. Her brother, whom I had never trusted, left menacing voicemails suggesting I back off before things get ugly. I checked out of the hotel and moved to a different one under an assumed name, unsettled by the intensity of Patricia's reaction. The next day, I met with Caroline Lawson, an attorney specializing in contested wills and estate fraud. "Your father was clever," Caroline said after reviewing the documents. "By creating the new will with an independent firm and filing it with the state, he established a strong legal position. Patricia can contest it, but she will need to prove he was not of sound mind when he signed it." "He knew exactly what he was doing," I assured her. "The question is, how far did Patricia go?" "These medical records suggest she may have been tampering with his medication." Caroline's expression grew serious. "If that is true, we are talking about potential criminal charges beyond just the will contest. But proving it will be difficult." We developed a strategy to enforce the will while gathering more evidence about Patricia's actions. Caroline filed emergency motions to freeze all estate assets and remove Patricia as executor, citing the explicit language of the new will and the concerning evidence from the safety deposit box. Meanwhile, Patricia launched a smear campaign among my father's social circle. She told anyone who would listen that I had manipulated my declining father, taking advantage of his grief over a recent friend's death to convince him to change his will. Amber always resented me. I heard she told the members of Dad's golf club she could not accept that Robert found happiness again after her mother died. She poisoned him against his new family. The irony of her using the word poisoned was not lost on me. A week after the will reading, I returned to my hotel room to find the door slightly ajar, my heart racing. I called hotel security before entering. The room had been searched, items moved and rearranged. Most concerning, the copies of Dad's medical records were missing, though I had fortunately kept the originals in a secure location. The hotel's security footage showed a man in a maintenance uniform entering my room, but his face was never clearly visible to the camera. The hotel manager was apologetic but could offer little help beyond changing my room and adding security. That evening, I received a surprising text from Mason. "Need to talk." "Not with Mom. Plaza Cafe tomorrow, 10 a.m. I was wary of a trap, but curious enough to agree, choosing a public location and arriving early to ensure I was not being set up. Mason arrived alone, looking tired and conflicted. "I do not know what to believe anymore," he admitted after ordering coffee. "Mom is falling apart. She is drinking all day, making frantic calls and burning documents in the backyard." "Burning documents?" I leaned forward. "What kind of documents?" He shrugged. "I do not know exactly. Financial stuff, I think. She sent Lindsay and me away when she realized we were watching. But listen, the thing is, I found some pills in her bathroom. Prescription bottles with your dad's name, but the labels partially torn off." My blood ran cold. "Mason, do you understand what that might mean?" He nodded miserably. I am not stupid, Amber. She is my mother. But Robert was good to us, and if she did something to him. He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. You need to tell the police, I urged. I cannot. Fear flashed across his face. But I will not lie for her either if it comes to that. As Mason was leaving, he paused. Lindsay wants to talk to you too. She is more confused than I am. Mom has always controlled her, but she really loved Robert. 2 days later, I met Lindsay at a small coffee shop across town. Unlike her usual polished appearance, she looked disheveled, her eyes red from crying. Is it true? She demanded without preamble. Did Mom really get left out of the real will? Not entirely, I explained. Dad set up trusts for all of you. You will be provided for, just not with the lump sums she expected. Lindsay's face crumpled. She promised me the beach house. Said I could have it after Robert died. She caught herself, looking horrified at her own words. Lindsay, when did she start making those promises? I do not know. Maybe a year ago. She twisted a napkin in her hands. She talked a lot about what we would do after, but I thought she meant after he retired or something. I did not think she meant. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I should go. She will know I talked to you. Despite my complicated feelings toward my step-siblings, I felt compassion for them. They had been raised by Patricia, shaped by her values and manipulations. They were victims too, in a different way. The situation escalated dramatically the following week. Patricia appeared uninvited at a charity event my father had supported annually, creating a scene when she saw me there speaking with board members. There she is, Patricia shouted, pointing at me across the crowded ballroom. The daughter who abandoned her father for years, then swooped in to steal his money. Security escorted her out as she continued to shout accusations. The incident made the local society pages, bringing unwanted publicity to the already complicated situation. That night, the anonymous threats began. First a text from an unknown number, back off or regret it. Then an email with photos of me entering and leaving my new hotel, showing I was being watched. I reported everything to the police and to Caroline, who accelerated our legal proceedings. We learned that Patricia had hired a notorious probate attorney known for aggressive tactics and dragging out estate cases for years. She is playing for time, Caroline explained. Trying to force a settlement by making the process so unpleasant and expensive that you will give up. But Patricia had underestimated both my determination and my father's foresight. While reviewing my father's personal papers, I discovered notes about Patricia's previous marriage. Dad had hired investigators who uncovered something shocking. Patricia had been married twice before, not once as she had claimed. Her first husband, a wealthy older man, had died suddenly of heart failure after just 3 years of marriage. Patricia had inherited everything, leaving his children from a previous marriage with nothing. The circumstances were disturbingly similar to my father's situation. Even more damning, Caroline's investigator discovered that Patricia's supposedly estranged ex-husband, the father of Mason and Lindsay, had never actually divorced her. They had staged a separation while maintaining a relationship, a fact documented in the surveillance photos found in the safety deposit box. The web of deception was more extensive than even my father had realized. Patricia was not just a gold digger, she was a practiced con artist with a pattern of targeting wealthy older men. The question that kept me awake at night was whether she had simply waited for my father to die naturally or had helped the process along. The police finally became directly involved when Patricia violated the temporary restraining order I had obtained. She appeared at a restaurant where I was dining with Eleanor, screaming accusations and attempting to physically confront me before being restrained by staff. The responding officers took statements and, upon learning of the existing order, took the matter seriously. When they escorted Patricia out, I overheard one officer mentioning to his partner that she smelled like a pharmacy. The pieces were falling into place. But Patricia still had one desperate move left to play. The court date for the preliminary hearing on the contested will arrive 3 weeks after the will reading. The courtroom was tense as Caroline and I faced Patricia and her attorney across the aisle. Mason sat behind his mother, but Lindsay was noticeably absent. Judge Harriet Walcott, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, reviewed the filings before addressing the court. Before we proceed, I want to be clear that I have zero tolerance for the kind of behavior described in these reports, she said, looking directly at Patricia. Harassment, intimidation, and violation of court orders will not help your case, Mrs. Mitchell. Patricia's attorney, Martin Drake, rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client denies any harassment. These are simply family disagreements blown out of proportion during a time of grief. Judge Walcott was unmoved. Save it for your arguments, counselor. Let's address the competing wills. The proceedings began with Drake presenting their case that the January will was valid and the later will was either a forgery or signed under undue influence. His arguments were polished but light on evidence. When it was Caroline's turn, she methodically demolished their position. She presented affidavits from the witnesses to the newer will, confirmation from the notary, and the state filing records. Most damaging was the testimony of Walter Bennett, my father's longtime attorney. Robert called me approximately 7 months ago. Walter testified. He expressed concerns about his wife's behavior and asked for recommendations for an independent attorney as he wished to update his will without Mrs. Mitchell's knowledge. He was of completely sound mind and explained his reasoning clearly. Patricia glared at Walter, who had once been a dinner guest in their home. He met her gaze steadily before continuing. Robert told me he had discovered financial improprieties and was concerned about his medical care. He believed Patricia was deliberately isolating him from his daughter and friends. Drake objected, claiming this was hearsay, but the judge allowed the testimony as evidence of my father's state of mind when changing his will. The most surprising moment came when Mason asked to address the court. Patricia hissed at him to sit down, but he approached the witness stand anyway. Under oath, Mason described finding prescription bottles hidden in Patricia's personal effects, overhearing arguments between Patricia and her ex-husband about speeding things up, and witnessing Patricia preventing me from seeing my father in the hospital. Robert was good to us, Mason concluded, his voice breaking. He did not deserve what happened to him. And Amber does not deserve what my mother is doing to her now. Patricia's face was a mask of fury. When Drake called her to testify, she had composed herself, playing the role of grieving widow with practice skill. She spoke of my father's declining mental state, my alleged abandonment when I moved to Seattle, and the happy blended family that had been destroyed by my jealousy and greed. It was a convincing performance, but it crumbled under Caroline's cross-examination. Using the timeline my father had created, Caroline walked Patricia through specific dates and events, catching her in multiple contradictions. Mrs. Mitchell, can you explain why you told the court you were with your husband continuously during his final days, yet credit card records show you dining at Chez Maurice with a Mr. James Winters on the evening before Mr. Mitchell's death? Patricia stammered. That was a brief business meeting. James is my ex-husband. We were discussing the children. The same ex-husband you claimed abandoned you and your children? The man you told Robert Mitchell you never wanted to see again. Caroline pressed. That is not relevant to this proceeding. Drake interjected. Caroline turned to the judge. Your Honor, it speaks directly to Mrs. Mitchell's credibility and pattern of deception. The judge agreed, and Caroline continued her methodical dismantling of Patricia's testimony. By the time she finished, Patricia was visibly shaken, her carefully constructed facade cracking. When all arguments concluded, Judge Walcott took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. Based on the evidence presented, I find the will dated July 15th to be valid and enforceable. The earlier will is hereby declared revoked. Mrs. Mitchell is removed as executor of the estate, and Ms. Amber Mitchell is appointed in her place as specified in the valid will. Patricia gasped audibly while relief washed over me. The judge continued, "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential elder abuse, fraud, and misconduct. Mrs. Mitchell is ordered to vacate the family residence within 48 hours and to turn over all financial records related to Mr. Mitchell's accounts." As we left the courtroom, Detective Liam Connolly from the Boston Police Department approached us. "Ms. Mitchell, I would like to speak with you about your father's medical records." Over the next several weeks, the full extent of Patricia's deception unfolded. The police investigation revealed that Patricia had never legally divorced her second husband, James Winters, making her marriage to my father potentially invalid. More disturbingly, toxicology tests ordered on preserved samples of my father's blood from the hospital showed elevated levels of digoxin, a heart medication he had not been prescribed. Patricia's careful house of cards collapsed completely when Lindsay, in a moment of remorse or self-preservation, turned over a journal in which Patricia had tracked my father's medication, noting which combinations made him most compliant and forgetful. Criminal charges were filed against Patricia for fraud, elder abuse, and as an accessory to involuntary manslaughter. James Winters was charged as a co-conspirator. While the legal process would take months or even years to fully resolve, Patricia's reign of terror was effectively over. The media coverage was intense and painful. Headlines like "Black Widow Strikes Again" and "Daughter's detective work unveils deadly plot" turned our family tragedy into public entertainment. I declined all interview requests, focusing instead on honoring my father's legacy and rebuilding what Patricia had tried to destroy. As I sorted through my father's belongings in the family home, now emptied of Patricia's presence, I discovered treasures she had hidden away, photos of my mother that had disappeared from display, letters they had written to each other during their courtship. Even my childhood art projects my father had carefully preserved. In his study, behind a false panel in his bookshelf that Patricia had apparently never discovered, I found a collection of videos my father had made over the years. Some were from my childhood, others were more recent reflections on his life and hopes for the future. The most recent was dated just 2 months before his death. "Amber," he said, looking directly into the camera, his face thin but his eyes clear, "if you are watching this, then things have gone as I feared they might. I want you to know that I realized my mistake with Patricia, and I have done everything I can to protect you and what we built together." He paused, emotion overcoming him momentarily. "I should have trusted your instincts about her from the beginning. You have your mother's wisdom. I hope you can forgive my foolishness." Tears streamed down my face as I watched. "I forgive you, Dad," I whispered to the screen. "Remember what matters," he continued. "Not the money or the properties, but the values we share. Integrity, compassion, perseverance. Those are your true inheritance, and no one can ever take them from you." In those moments, watching my father's final messages, I felt him with me again. Not just in memory, but in spirit. Despite Patricia's best efforts, she had failed to destroy the bond between us. In the end, love and truth had prevailed. 6 months after the courtroom confrontation with Patricia, I finally moved back into my childhood home. The process of reclaiming the space was both painful and healing. I had considered selling it as specified in the will, but after careful consideration and consultation with the estate attorneys, I decided to maintain ownership and convert part of the property into the headquarters for the Elizabeth Mitchell Foundation, named after my mother. The foundation, funded by a significant portion of my inheritance, would focus on supporting cancer research and providing resources for children who had lost parents to illness. It felt like the perfect way to honor both my parents' legacies. As I wandered through the renovated spaces, Memories of my childhood mingled with fresh paint and new furnishings. I had removed most traces of Patricia's cold modern aesthetic, restoring the warm, comfortable style my mother had originally created. Eleanor, who had continued working for Mitchell Development during the transition, joined me for tea in the sunroom that had always been my mother's favorite space. "Your father would be so proud," she said, looking around at the transformation. "He was so worried near the end, not just about the money, but about his legacy being twisted." "Did he ever tell you what first made him suspicious of Patricia?" I asked. Eleanor nodded. "It was something small, actually. He noticed her removing photos of your mother from his bedside table when she thought he was asleep. When he confronted her, she claimed she was just dusting them. But it started him thinking about other changes she had made, how isolated he had become. We talked for hours about my father's final year, filling in gaps in my understanding." Eleanor shared stories I had never heard, including how my father had secretly maintained contact with many of his old friends despite Patricia's efforts to cut him off. "He never stopped talking about you," she assured me. "Every achievement, every call. Those were his brightest moments." The legal proceedings against Patricia continued to unfold. She remained in custody, denied bail due to the severity of the charges and her substantial flight risk. Mason had agreed to testify against her in exchange for immunity from any accessory charges. Lindsay's situation was more complicated. Psychological evaluations suggested she had been severely manipulated by her mother throughout her life, creating an unhealthy dependence. She was receiving therapy while staying with her biological father's sister. Despite their role in the painful events surrounding my father's death, I could not bring myself to abandon Mason and Lindsay entirely. They had been victims of Patricia's machinations too, raised in an environment of deception and materialism. After much reflection, I established college trust funds for both of them using a small portion of my inheritance. The trusts were structured to encourage education and independence, values my father had championed. Mason was already enrolled in community college, working to define his own path away from his mother's influence. The family home gradually filled with the items that had been placed in storage when Patricia redecorated. Family heirlooms returned to their places of honor, including my grandmother's antique clock that had always stood in the entrance hall and the collection of sailboat models my father and I had built together over the years. 3 months after moving back in, I organized a memorial service for my father at his favorite sailing club. Unlike the formal, impersonal funeral Patricia had arranged, this gathering was intimate and authentic. Dad's oldest friends shared stories that made us laugh and cry, celebrating the man he truly was rather than the sanitized version Patricia had presented to the world. Robert always said that a person's true wealth was measured by the lives they touched, not the assets they accumulated, Walter said, raising a glass in tribute. By that measure, he was the richest man I ever knew. As I listened to the stories, I realized how much of my father's life I still had to discover. Each person who spoke revealed facets of him I had never seen, expanding my understanding of the complex, generous man who had raised me. The healing process was neither quick nor linear. Some days, grief would overwhelm me without warning. Other days, anger would flare when I thought about the precious final moments with my father that Patricia had stolen from me. The knowledge that she had deliberately hastened his death for financial gain was a wound that might never fully heal. Yet amid the pain, I found unexpected gifts. The adversity had revealed my own strength and resilience. I had discovered allies in unlikely places and learned to trust my instincts just as my father had advised years ago. Most importantly, I had honored my father's final wishes, protecting the legacy he had worked so hard to build. As the seasons changed, I gradually established new routines and traditions. Sunday mornings, once reserved for sailing with Dad, became my time for volunteer work with a children's grief support group. The holiday season, which I had dreaded facing without him, became an opportunity to host a gathering for others who had lost loved ones. One spring morning, as I sat in my father's study reviewing foundation proposals, I came across a quote he had framed on his desk. "The greatest inheritance a parent can give their children is a few minutes of their time each day." Despite his success and wealth, my father's most valuable gift had always been his presence. That was the legacy I wanted to honor most in my own life going forward, giving my time and attention generously to causes and people who mattered. The legal system eventually delivered its verdict on Patricia. She was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The news brought a complex mix of emotions, not the triumphant satisfaction I might once have expected, but a quieter sense that justice had been served and that my father could rest in peace. I kept my promise to visit Mason and Lindsay occasionally, meeting them on neutral ground as they worked to build lives independent of their mother's toxic influence. These relationships remained complicated, but I remembered my father's capacity for forgiveness and tried to embody that spirit. Looking back on the turbulent journey from that devastating phone call about my father's hospitalization to the peaceful life I was building now, I recognized how much I had grown. The pain had transformed me, burning away naivety and replacing it with wisdom. The betrayal had taught me to value authenticity and to recognize manipulation. The loss had deepened my appreciation for genuine connection. My father's final gift had not been the inheritance that Patricia had coveted so desperately. It had been the truth, painful but necessary, and the opportunity to reclaim not just his assets, but his true legacy of integrity and compassion. As I stood at my father's grave on the anniversary of his death, I placed white roses, his favorite, beside the headstone. "I kept my promise, Dad," I whispered. "Your story was told. Your wishes were honored. Your legacy continues." The journey through grief and betrayal had taught me that family is not always defined by blood or legal ties. Sometimes it is created through shared values, mutual respect, and genuine care. My father had understood this truth at the end, making provisions not based on traditional definitions of family but on the authentic bonds he cherished. That understanding has become my guiding principle as I move forward. I choose carefully who I allow into my inner circle now, valuing character over charm, substance over appearance. The wealth my father left me provides security, but it is the wisdom gained through our shared ordeal that proves most valuable in navigating life's complexities. If you have experienced betrayal within your family or found yourself fighting for what is rightfully yours, I hope my story offers some comfort and guidance. Trust your instincts. Document everything and never underestimate the power of truth to eventually prevail. Family conflicts around inheritance can reveal people's true characters, often in shocking ways. Have you experienced something similar, or do you know someone who has? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story helped you in any way, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might be facing similar challenges. Thank you for listening to my journey from betrayal to healing. Remember, sometimes the greatest strength comes from surviving our deepest wounds.